実に会いたくてね。
32使いが86に噛みつこうってのか。380馬力にチューンした32で。それくらいわかるさ。直線でのエキゾーストパワー。
The Nissan Skyline, lovingly known worldwide as the king of Japanese cars, or more commonly, Godzilla. You guys voted for it, so here it is. 3 letters that pretty much define JDM culture are associated with the Skyline, the famous GTR model. Its compact size and high power output have given it an edge on and off the track. The most popular later model of the GTR came with one of the world's most advanced all-wheel drive systems and drivetrain that is capable of outputting unbelievable power levels, with the earlier models keeping it light and rear-wheel drive, becoming an absolute monster around the track. So Godzilla, what makes it so great? The Skyline C10 is by far one of the best looking classic Japanese cars ever made. It is the first Skyline model created under Nissan's newly acquired ownership. The 2 top trims for the C10 were the 2000 GT and the GTR. The 2000 GT came with a 2-liter L20 engine making only 105 horsepower. The GTR was actually quite quick, coming with a 2-liter S20 engine making 160 horsepower. That may not seem like a huge horsepower number, in fact it's pretty pitiful. When the car itself only weighed 2,400 pounds, then it didn't need much to feel like a rocket through a corner. You may be asking yourself, where can you pick one of these up? It is plainly over 25 years old. Good luck getting one for a good price. They currently go for just under $100,000 in the US, and that's like the price of a brand new GTR, so. After the C10 came the just as sexy C110 model. This one gave us the seeds that would grow into the classic Skyline lights we see today, or Chevy Impala lights depending on how you clean your glasses. It was a slightly more European-inspired body style, stealing elements from the Citroen SM. The styling actually went on to inspire other legendary Japanese cars. The Sylvia... Go check out my video on that. We'll skip right to the GTR model. This time, it made the same 160 horsepower out of the same S20 engine as it had in the C10. The C210 existed, I guess. It didn't have a GTR model, it was sort of boring. It did get a turbo L20 engine, but that only made 140 horsepower, so moving on. Oh yeah, 80s. We're getting boxy once again. So our naming scheme has become much more familiar with the R30. The base models are almost unrecognizable as a Skyline. We still didn't have a GTR for this generation, but the R's trim is close enough. Those backlights, totally Skyline. It came with a turbo FJ20 power plant making 188 horsepower. There was also a Group A version of the car making 240 horsepower, but we'll get to that in the Motorsports section. Okay, we still look like a refrigerator on wheels, but that's okay, because the R31 is light, has gotten itself a brand new engine that you may recognize. The GTS trims of this model featured the RB20 this time around. Still no official GTR model, but the GTSR is close enough to the real deal for us. Speaking of the GTSR, its RB20 DET makes 210 horsepower from the factory, with a twin turbo system pushing all of its power to the back wheels. 210 may still seem low, but consider that the Skyline still weighed less than 3,000 pounds. One of its racing versions actually produced 430 horsepower for Group A, but as I said before, we'll get to that later. We all know the R32, especially those of us in the US who have finally gotten our first taste of the Skyline with the imports of the R32. This generation, they dropped all body styles other than the coupe and sedan, but we didn't worry about the others anyway. The The true change came with the introduction of the all-wheel drive system. They brought back the GTR finally in this generation with the RB26 twin turbo, making 276 horsepower. I put 276 in quotation marks because that was the max horsepower allowed by the Japanese gentleman's agreement. It actually made closer to 285 horsepower. It also had a 4-door version known as the GTST 4-door that came with the RB20 turbo, making 212 horsepower. Now please don't take offense, but the R33 is known as the boat of the Skyline generations. It makes similar power as the R32 but weighs about 300 pounds more. The GTR of this generation came with the RB26 making 304 horsepower. Surprisingly, they actually made a 4-door version of the GTR for this generation, produced by Autech. This was also the generation when Nissan introduced another car, called the Stagea, which was a wagon based on the same chassis. We may get to that in a later video. Nissan basically took the making of the R33 as a way to work out all of the kinks the R32 had previously. They did improve immensely in a lot of areas, but it didn't dominate motorsports like the R32 had. Oh boy, here we go. The most hyped Skyline in the history of Skylines. The legendary R34. The regular GTR trim made around 330 horsepower, but the higher trims made upwards of 400 horsepower. The GTR model became famous mostly because of the advanced computer that was put inside of it. It could read out many of the stats about the engine and adjust many of its variables to make it a demon on the track. Keep in mind the technology that made this possible was almost entirely foreign to buyers of the GTR. In 1999, this is what a computer looked like. Its RB26 DETT can make thousands of horsepower under the right setup. Also, when someone puts anti-lag on it, it gets crazy. Okay, I know what you're saying. The R35 GTR isn't a Skyline, and my answer to that is, I don't care. This video is more about the GTR anyway. Also, after this, the Skyline turned into, well, The R35 now came with a V6 VR38 DETT making 550 to 600 horsepower. It was purpose-built for speed, unlike the Skyline GTR, which was just a sportier model of a regular car. This makes it a crazy sports car when it is on the street or track. Because the engine and chassis were both designed with speed and power in mind, when modified the R35 is insane. Alpha Performance is probably the most well-known performance shop with their Alpha Omega package making upwards of 2,000 horsepower to the wheels. The C10 had a sparse race history with its main rival in the form of the Mazda RX-3. The C110 was in production during the oil crisis, so Nissan ended up not competing in any racing events. The R30 competed in plenty of touring car championships. The race version of the R30, known as the DR30, made 340 horsepower. The R31 GTSR was actually created as a homologated version of their Group A car. It supposedly made a crazy 430 horsepower, but that wasn't enough to compete with the Ford RS500, making 110 more horsepower. It also competed in touring car championships. Now, the R32 is where things start to get crazy. The RB26 was actually designed to make 500 horsepower, but was severely detuned due to the gentleman's agreement, which they were breaking anyway. When it came to racing, the R32 destroyed. Touring car championships had been overcome by the GTR. It knocked Ford off the podium in Australia so badly that the Australian press gave the GTR its age-old nickname, Godzilla. The V-Spec was introduced after rules were loosened to allow bigger wheels. The V in V-Spec stood for Victory Spec, believe it or not. The R33 did well in the racing world, but not nearly as well as the R32. The R34, surprisingly, doesn't have much of a racing history. Most likely it was primarily used for private racing. The R35 has had a huge following in motorsports. It competed in many forms of motorsports, including Super GT. It won the 2008 GT season in the Zanavi Nismo GTR, with Satoshi Motoyama and Benoit Toulier behind the wheel. The Skyline may have made alright numbers stock, but most of the engines that were actually in the GTR were detuned from the factory. When tuners got their hands on any of the Skylines that came with an RB engine, they found that it could actually push much more power than it was initially given. On stock internals, many tuners are able to squeeze 500 horsepower out of the engine, with rumors that some people are getting close to 700 horsepower or more. When they are completely built out, you know they're going to make a ton of power, with some people making 1600 horsepower semi-reliably. The engine may output a good amount of power, but it's typically limited by its displacement of only 2.6 liters. That's only 100 milliliters more than an STI 4-banger. This in no way means that the RB engine is slow. We all know just how crazy the Skyline really is. The R35 of course doesn't come with the RB26, but actually comes with the VR38 DETT. The VR is a 3.8 liter V6 that, with its increased displacement, has become one of the craziest engines ever made. Whereas the RB could only push about 1600 horsepower, the VR has pushed around 3000 in its highest power tunes. The Skyline will continue to be on the podium for best JDM car for years to come. Even if the first one was released almost 50 years ago, they could still be found at the track drifting. Today, they have made a resurgence as they've become legal in the United States and are finally placed in the hands of American tuners. Did you like the AE86 video I made, or just 86s in general? Don't forget to go check out Teespring for the new sweatshirts I just dropped featuring the 86. I've also changed things up a bit. I want you guys to vote on the next What Makes It So Great video, and what car you'd like to see on it. So, there's going to be a poll in the corner. As always, thanks for watching.